Good morning, David Settle back with you, and my pleasure to welcome in studio. He is running for Wyoming's lone seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Greg Hunter is on the program with me. Good morning. How are you doing?
Great, David. Glad to be here. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming in. Let's talk a little bit about, first of all, why you're running here for Wyoming's lone seat in the House of Representatives. This is not always Wyoming to me is a little bit different of a political climate than other states. So, but tell me a little bit about why you're running, why you chose to run.
Well, I've always had kind of a political bent, and then I guess when I'm a big fan of public lands, and one of the reasons I'm in Wyoming is that to take advantage of the large amount of public lands that are owned by 370 million, U.S. citizens. So when I saw the assault on public lands prior to Trump being elected, I was thinking about the issue, and then once Mr. Trump got elected, and you could see the assault, ramp up in earnest. I mean, I understand getting energy. We obviously need to do that, but we also need to have a good plan about what we're going to do with our lands and how much water. There's all kinds of things, but public lands were one of the things. But I've always studied, healthcare and tourism and energy, so it was kind of an easy run, really, to make.
All right, we'll dive into a lot of those in just a moment here. Again, Greg Hunter is my guest this morning, and on the ballot for the U.S. House of Representatives seat that Wyoming has back in Washington, D.C. So that's why you're running. And then how has the campaign trail gone? How do you think things have gone here, especially since the primary?
You never understood. I guess I was running in the primary to win the primary, and once I won the primary, then you take everything after that. I didn't know how things would play out. I'm somewhat a nominal rookie at it. My campaign manager, who was involved in a bad traffic accident, really did a great job. He's doing better, but he did a really great job in helping me win the primary. And then after that, you need to try to get as much money as possible, get as much exposure as possible. And the state is very large. I usually travel it to enjoy the outdoors, but this time I'm traveling it to enjoy the people of Wyoming and the different, the city with the long streets, but each has its own radio station, has its own paper, and for a state this large, for a small amount of population, it's absolutely unique in the world under those auspices. It's really a fantastic.
So, crisscrossing this state, how do you feel your message has been received by voters?
Well, on Facebook, I get a lot of negative things on certain. I mean, I really do think a lot of people do. If I could talk to everybody in the state, I feel like I get elected. Okay. Absolutely. Okay. Once I start interacting with people, the commonality comes together. But you have to spend about 10 minutes usually, especially as a Democrat in Wyoming. You have to spend about 10 minutes talking to each person to get those things recognized, that you wouldn't be controlled by Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. These memes that have been pervaded through the airways, through the right-wing media, are absolutely something we have to break down first before we find common ground with people across Wyoming.
Why do you think that is? Have you gotten a perspective in terms of why you think that opinion, that perception is out there? Well,
to be honest, I think to me, growing up with Rush Limbaugh and Fox News is one of those issues that we can now, with social media and with the media we have, we used to just have 3 or 4 TV channels that all pretty much said the same thing. Now, if you find something you like that has a message you like, you can get caught up in that vortex and just really never come out until you run across somebody during Thanksgiving dinner or political, areas where you get challenged on your issues. And not everybody's walking into a bar and challenging you on your issues. You're usually talking about other things. So it's this kind of advocacy that brings out the differences in people.
Let's talk about some of the things that you're running on. You talked about public lands, and we'll get to that in just a moment. What do you think is the big #1 issue right now that faces this state? What, if you had to pick one, what would you think is kind of the top priority for our representative back in D.C. as it relates to Wyoming?
Well, Wyoming needs to make sure that it gets enough revenue to fund all of its services in Wyoming. It absolutely has great services for a 6th largest state, but again, we're spread out all over Wyoming, so we have to provide services all over Wyoming, whether it be public education or health care or road systems. All these things cost more in Wyoming, so we need to make sure that we're getting enough revenue to cover the services. I do think the state legislature has the hard one. For some reason, Congress can go making, turning $19 trillion in debts into $21 trillion in debt, and we haven't seen the outcome of that. We did, I guess, under the last administration, the last Republican administration, the thing blew up, but we'll see how this one goes. But that's kind of the issue.
All right, so you've got a number of different priorities should you be elected, and of course we're just over a week away from Election Day, coming up next Tuesday, November 6th. You can already vote here in Wyoming. Absentee balloting is open, and then the polls will be open next Tuesday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. What are other big issues you feel like are facing the country right now, Greg?
Well, I do think that healthcare is the thing that people talk about the most. That we've been promised almost over the last 12, 13 years that we would get something better every time. And really that hasn't come to fruition. The costs have gone up, the services have gone down. It's very hard to afford health care in Wyoming. And my belief is, if you look at the Constitution, it does say to provide for the general welfare and the common defense. And the beauty about the Constitution is those ideas can change over time. What is the general welfare and what is the common defense? So I love the Constitution on that point. So when I hear that it's not something that's enumerated, absolutely not. But I do think healthcare is something that the federal government needs to play in, because we have a lot of financial pressure, since the U.S. government buys a lot of healthcare services, whether Medicare, Medicaid, Tri-Services, VA. We're the big player in the room, so we can drive costs if we want to.
So how would DC go about fixing it? How would the federal government be? Because you feel like the healthcare system's broken, but you said the Affordable Care Act is anything but affordable. So which is interesting, because I don't hear that from most Democrats. I'll say that much. That it's
You mean honesty?
Yeah.
Well, you got to be honest here.
Well, I'm somebody. Okay, so I have health insurance, but let's just say that I don't know necessarily if I want to pay for everybody else's health insurance, I guess, quote unquote. How would you respond to something like that?
But that's what insurance is about, and I absolutely get that. Mm-hmm. I'll just be honest, I don't have health insurance at all. So I understand. I pay for my services based on what I can negotiate with my doctor. Okay. And I believe that it is much too expensive to afford. So I'll be honest that I don't have it. So I understand that there needs to be some reform there for me to buy into it, because I do feel like that we are covering things, or there's no. In other words, we have to cover everybody, and I think we should. If you get in a catastrophic accident, I think that should be under the government. If you have cancer issues, I think we should all be paying for that. But all the elective services in the middle, I do believe there's free market alternatives that help with that. I just believe we can do that.
So how do we go about driving the cost down? Where does that pressure come from from a governmental standpoint?
Well, there's two issues. I think insurance, if we look at what we have here, $3 are paid, but $1 goes for medical services, the rest is administrative. So that's a big, right there.
Yep.
And then the federal government is the big purveyor. They buy the most medicines, they buy the most services. So they could drive costs down if they choose to. However, Congress appears to be bought and paid for by first the pharmaceutical industry, and then maybe the military industry after that. Eisenhower's final get-out speech. I'm 55, so I cross both. I understand millennials, but I also understand the baby boomers and those beyond. So yes, I think we can drive healthcare costs down, and we need to be better about it, because somebody like me who feels like they're healthy, I watched my father, pay all of his life into corporate, and as soon as he gets on the government, that's when he gets sick, and that's when he dies.
Oh wow!
So you can look, the corporations and the insurance industry have it pretty much figured out. We pay into that system forever, and then really, right when we get on the cusp of getting sick, the actuarial people do have it figured out, the insurance people, we drop onto the government system. My mother loves Medicare, but what was sold when Medicare came around is we are far delivering above that today for what we're costing. And if you look, the amount of people working in society are going down, the big slug of baby boomers. So there's less people my age and below supporting an older population, which is one of the reasons why, you know, the employment number's gone down. In other words, there's less people to do the same amount of jobs that were in the past.
Right.
So there's a lot of issues coming together there, and we all have to think about it.
All right, so healthcare is one big, and I agree with you, because that seems to be one of the biggest topics, you know, of conversation. What else do you feel like are main priorities that you want to focus on should you be elected and get back to D.C.?
Well, I think we need to work on civility so that we can come to compromise and move things forward. I do think we've stopped, you know, having ideas. We just argue about very minute things, and that comes to, you know, we continue to put attorneys up there that argue about the nuances of small little words, and I think we need to have bigger ideas. I do believe that there are ideas out there that will help out Wyoming's inability to, like, even move coal to the Millennium Bulk Terminal in Washington, Longview. You know, the state of Washington slowing that down. Really, we're just shipping black rocks across the world. I see no reason why that should be stopped when any other good is not. So there's a lot of things that we need to work together on so that we don't cause damage, because now we're warring on very important things, whether environmental issues are important. Weaponizing environmental issues is not good for America and not good for our health and safety as we go forward.
Let me live on KOWB, driven by White University Motors, your dealer for the people. We're visiting with Greg Hunter, who is in studio with me this morning. He is a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. We're talking about some of the big issues. Immigration seems to be another big topic in this election. Where do you fall there in terms of immigration? You know, we are a nation of immigrants because we didn't, you know, when our forefathers came over here from you know, where they feel they were kind of being persecuted. But there is such a talk about immigrants coming in from a legal, illegal standpoint. Where are you at with immigration?
I think immigration is a complex subject. One, we need secure borders. I won't discount that. But the amount of people coming to America has actually declined over the last 30 years. The history of immigration in America is an interesting thing. When you know, this country formed, there wasn't, you know, there was a lot of people coming in. We really didn't have an immigration policy, but the Constitution allowed for Congress to do it. And you know, as the 1870s come to a close, mostly the Northern Europeans were here and pressured Congress to shut the door on the Southern Europeans. So, you know, this kind of argument's going on for a long time. However, there are Southern neighbors, and we have a couple of things going on that influence those things. For the past 40 years, we've messed in our Southern neighbors' politics, worried about communism, worried about things, you know, Reagan, Iran-Contra. If you look through the lens of history, we've messed around in their elections. Now we're getting ours. People mess around in our elections. What goes around comes around. Right. So half the people coming up, you know, probably want to come up for economic reasons, and we need to close that down. But if they're coming up because they're being terrorized by their own countries, as now more right-wing, you know, people are getting elected. The Brazilian elector was elected the other day, and he said, either go to jail or get out of my country if you're an oppressive. So as more authoritarian leaders are elected in these places, people start to be on the move, and now everybody's under pressure. We all just need to get along.
How do we go about that? That is a tough question nowadays.
Well, that is a tough question. I believe the civil discourse has gone down. I thought it would dissipate. Really, the world's getting better. I mean, if we look around at cities and societies, their murder rate has actually gone down. Most people don't like to believe that. I mean, more police officers were killed under Ronald Reagan than under Obama. But you probably wouldn't hear that being mentioned in America today. So as the world gets better, for some reason, I guess as it gets better, we argue about smaller and smaller things because we like to argue. So I really don't understand why all this hysteria and fear. If you look to the right, you know, Trump, his memes are, you know, about fear and about they're coming to get you. We should be less fearful. I mean, our southern neighbors have many of the same ideals we have. They're Catholics. They're family oriented. So they want to work. They're hard workers. So we need to come to a better understanding about how we do these things. Our costs are going to go up because we don't have people working in our fields anymore. Things aren't being delivered. So we're in for a real interesting time.
You talked about public lands. Obviously, you want to keep that access open, which obviously a lot of Wyoming residents want to see because they want that access for hunting, fishing, different things like that. What else kind of stands out at you in terms of what's going on in our state right now? Anything jump out at you that you've kind of come across on the campaign trail?
Well, I think the assault on public lands is a very interesting one because I think it's a nuanced approach. It's being done at the county level. They're trying to go after these wilderness study areas. And I kind of get the wilderness study area issue, so it gets very complex, I guess, for the public lands issue. But for a state that has the most public lands, or one of the most, our access is a lot restricted because of how things work around here in Wyoming. Once you buy up the land around it, you restrict access. So now that becomes de facto your land, and the wealthy landowners know that. So if we keep electing basically fifth-generation cattle ranchers to Wyoming legislature, your access is going to continue to go down, and they're going to continue to think that eventually they're going to own that land, and they'll own the water rights, and they'll own everything that goes along with it. So the chess pieces are on the board, Wyoming. You better just wake up because the market signals are out there telling you that land's going, that the supposed Obama's war on coal. Again, my first job in 1988. One of them was taking down one of my dad's coal-fired plants called Tate Station. Turned it into a gas-fired plant in 1988. So look at the future. We better understand where we need to diversify our economy. We do need coal. We do need oil. But how much is it going to cost, and how much do we look into the future that we need to diversify before those days are over?
Lastly, I know we're a week away or 8 days away from the election. What's a message that you want to get out to voters in terms of why they should vote for you, Greg?
Well, I support Wyoming. I support Wyoming's values. So again, I think we need to have a check. Congress is supposed to be a check on the presidency on some of the baser instincts. So we should stand up on some of these issues, but we should also stand up for Wyoming's values. And the more we, again, a Democrat being in the House of Representatives, when it does go blue, somebody like me will be more able to work with the Democratic counterparts and Republican counterparts in the West to get more things done for Wyoming. So that's really what it's about. I mean, you're running for the issues that matter, but Wyoming's a unique state. It reflects what's going on in the world. It worries about immigration. It worries about energy. It worries, again, about tourism, which we have an astronomical amount. So much so that Jackson Hole's getting depressed about it. So we need to move that tourism down into here, down into all the areas that are fantastic in Wyoming, why we choose to live here. But we don't want to encourage them too much. We don't want to encourage them too much. The green and white invasion plate, they're coming over the border all the time now. We got to keep them away. So I get, that we want the wind to whip through. We want those cold days to be shown to University of Wyoming so that they don't show up. But we do want them to come here during the pleasant times to get that dollar.
Yep. Yeah, we want them to spend the money. So.
Yes.
Well, Greg, best of luck to you next week.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you coming in this morning.
Thank you very much.